Over the past 150 years, we have noticed that traditional colonization has given way to economic colonization. Developing nations are taking on huge amount of massive debts from developed economies for improving their infrastructure while their people live in abject poverty. Is this the right sustainable model for the future?
We also need to plan for an economic future that holds the ideals of economic equality and social justice at its core.
I believe that the Indian economy has great potential to make a rebound, and it's just a matter of putting our intellectual, human, and material resources to good use in order to create a more equitable and environmentally sustainable future.
Inclusivity becomes a cornerstone in building such a large community of like-minded people in order to build a sustainable economy.
In my opinion, the Copernican moment for the discipline of economics already happened more than 150 years ago, when the classical and neoclassical economists who followed Adam Smith fell in love with Newtonian mechanics in a trance now sometimes referred to as physics envy. Their assumption that everything inexorably revolves around money and the only thing that counts is movement of goods and services, in other words, production and consumption, was simply an extension of heliocentric theory. What we need today is an Einsteinian moment, acknowledging the complexities and relativities of the real world and displacing the over-entrenched money numeraire by the measures of what makes life really worthwhile and sustainable. Equity and fairness, fulfillment and happiness, and the health of people, their communities, and of nature and of the planet's life support systems, for example.
Why is it easier to imagine the end of the world but not the end of capitalism? This could be because we wrongly associate capitalism with the dynamic energy of the bazaar. But the fact is that societies across the world found many dimensional ways of nurturing the bazaar as a mechanism of freedom, of exchange, of creativity. What capitalism did was it reduced pretty much all value to one-dimensional, which is the purely material, and at that mostly monetary. So the Copernican revolution in economics is not new. It's been around at least 150 years, but climate chaos, the threat of climate chaos, has accelerated. It has given us a sense of urgency. And indeed, even if nobody can yet imagine the end of capitalism, certainly a lot of very creative people like Arun and others are working for the transformation of capitalism.
Two questions are being asked with increasing frequency both in India and around the world. Is our pattern of economic growth sustainable and fair? It is clear that a new research is required for human development and societal progress in order to mitigate the prevalent risks to the environment and social harmony. Dennis J. Snower, president of the Global Solutions Initiative, which provides policy advice to the G20, feels economics is reaching its Copernican moment. The moment when it is finally becoming clear that the current ways of thinking about economic behavior are inadequate. In conversation with former Planning Commission member Arun Maira, Professor Snower unpacks the idea of the future of evonomics. Be inspired. Is the Copernican moment in economics about to come? Professor Dennis J. Snower in conversation with Arun Maira. Professor Dennis J. Snower is founder and president of the Global Solutions Initiative, professor of macroeconomics and sustainability at the Hertie School, Berlin, fellow at the New Institute, Hamburg, senior research fellow at the Blavatnik School of Government, Oxford, non-resident fellow of Brookings Institution and visiting professor at University College, London. He has published extensively on employment policy, the design of welfare systems, caring economics, and monetary and fiscal policy. Professor Dennis J. Snower. In his career spanning 5 decades, Arun Maira has led several organizations including the Boston Consulting Group in India, the Tata Group at various important positions, Arthur D. Little Incorporated and its subsidiary Innovation Associates, where he advised companies across sectors and geographies. He has a unique combination of hands-on leadership roles in the private, government and social sectors. In 2009, he was appointed as a member of India's Planning Commission, where he led the development of strategies on issues across industrialization and urbanization. His most recent book is A Billion Fireflies: Critical Conversations to Shape a New Post-Pandemic World.
We seem to know how to make economic growth faster, and indeed had, with the so-called liberalization of the Indian economy since the 1990s. In fact, we boasted that India was the fastest growing free market economy in the world, just behind China. However, there were dangerous warnings that the pattern of growth was neither environmentally nor societally sustainable. India was the most water-stressed large country in the world, and the Indian economy was generating fewer jobs per unit of growth than other economies. And this was tragic in a country with the largest population of youth in the world, who were expected to provide a demographic dividend to growth, provided they had jobs and could earn and save money. At that time, the world was struggling through the consequences of the global financial crisis, the 2008 and onwards. Growth had slumped. Economists said they must discover a new normal economics because the old economics did not have solutions. The Nobel laureate economist Michael Spence, who chaired the International Growth Commission of Economists and Policymakers, said on the release of their report here in Delhi, mainstream economics had solutions for how to make growth faster, but not how to make it inclusive. Dennis, at a time now when the IPCC have declared code red on the environment, and the COVID pandemic has exacerbated further the inequities in the world, where the rich have vaccines and the poor do not, and stock markets are booming, while hundreds of millions have lost their sources of incomes. What do you think are the fundamental shifts that must take place in mainstream economics for it to be a useful guide for the progress of humanity?
I think mainstream economics will have to change fundamentally, and it will have to do so in at least 5 respects that I'd like to summarize. And these 5 respects are simplifications that economists have of reality, but they are not harmless simplifications. I'd argue that they are harmful simplifications that prevent us from grasping the potential of the future. So the first aspect in which economics has to change is it needs to go beyond its vision of pure individualism. Homo economicus is an individual making autonomous decisions. And that overlooks something terribly important. And it's something I believe that India is far more in tune with than the West. And that is, we operate as human beings at different levels of functional organization. We can operate as individuals, but we can also operate in groups. And each of us belongs to groups of many different constitutions and sizes: religious groups, cultural groups, national groups, sports groups, etc. And that aspect has been completely overlooked. And that is terribly important because the global problems that you have mentioned, the pandemic, climate change, they are problems that affect all of humanity. And therefore, it's necessary to address those problems at that level, at the level of the world. And looking at things at a national level, global level, selfish level, just totally inappropriate. We have the ability to do so as human beings, but economics is not allowing us to address this ability. So to bring that into economic analysis would be really important. Secondly, economics sees relations between individuals as socially disengaged. We trade in the marketplace. All we need to know about one another is the prices at which we trade. That, I think, is dangerous rubbish because economies are human constructs and they are embedded in societies. And social relations are the primal force that drive everything. Even most of our economic relations are permeated by our social relations. And therefore, I think what we need, therefore, is to understand fully what we need to do internally and externally in order for these socially relations to be cooperative and enable us to achieve our goals. And this requires, and here I've learned so much from your books, Arun, it requires systems thinking, seeing the whole, which I claim we can do via our collective objectives and our group identities. And it also requires something terribly important, which you have emphasized, which is deep listening. Listening without preconceptions to people who are unlike us and thereby able to take on other perspectives. And particularly nowadays, where we have got these huge global problems that affect everyone, seeing things from many different perspectives is going to be terribly important. And only then will it be possible to engage in empathy, mind reading, compassion, loving kindness, all the things that we need in order for us to connect in adequate social relations. So that's the second point. The first was individualism. The second is socially disengaged behavior. We need to drop that. Third is to see our ignorance primarily in terms of risk. That is, anything we don't know, we can attach a probability to, and then our probability calculus allows us to calculate exactly what we need to do. And instead, we need to understand the intrinsic unknowability of the universe. It is beyond our comprehension, and therefore we face primarily not risk, but uncertainty. And uncertainty, not only because we don't know the probabilities, but because we cannot anticipate the events that lie ahead. And we also don't know whether the concepts that we use are adequate to analyze the events. So these are uncertainties on many different levels, and that requires a different approach to economics. It requires, I would say, a theory pluralism. We need to keep in mind as many theories as we can that are compatible with the facts, and then keep an open mind across these theories in order to be able to navigate our environment. Because the evolution of human affairs is a non-stationary process. So the forecasting tools we use all assume that everything we do is a repeated experiment, and therefore what holds in the past will continue to hold in the future. That is completely untrue, and particularly in times of great change like what we're going through. The fourth is to see well-being entirely in terms of consumption-driven utility, which economists tend to do. The more consumption we have, the better off we are, and that's it as far as well-being is concerned. Instead, we need to see well-being as a multifaceted, context-dependent entity. And we have developed in Global Solutions a dashboard called SAGE, S-A-G-E. And S stands for solidarity, and that means our connectedness, our embeddedness in society. A stands for agency, which is empowerment, the ability to shape your fate through your own efforts. G stands for material gain. That's what economists generally are after. And E stands for environmental sustainability. And if each of these parts of the dashboard are doing well, the society is holding together, people feel empowered, they have enough material well-being to support their basic needs, and they're not killing the environment, such a country is doing well. And we have looked at this for longer periods of time for over 150 countries in the world, and we find very interesting results. That the time paths of solidarity, agency, material gain, and environmental sustainability are all largely independent of one another. So just focusing on GDP does not really help you understand where we're meant to go. And then the last aspect is we tend to evaluate progress in terms of economic growth. And instead, I believe economics needs to look at it in terms of multi-level selection. Our most important characteristics as human beings are our ability to cooperate and to innovate. And cooperation requires social relations, systems thinking, and innovation requires creativity, harnessing uncertainty in new ways. And if we manage to do that, then we will be able to address global problems at a global level, national problems at a national level, local problems at a local level. And that, I believe, should be our new conception of progress.
And Dennis, you mentioned 5 quite fundamental changes that are absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we will not be improving the well-being of all the citizens of India, especially those who are the least included in the growth of the economy. Churches and kings were threatened by Copernicus's discovery that everything in the universe did not revolve around the earth, and that human beings were a small sideshow in a vast universe. And we seem to be at a Copernican moment in economics now. That was physics and the natural sciences. Economics has been shaken off its pedestal as the supreme scientific social science. And I think it's hard for economists to let go of their power. Yet you, an eminent economist yourself, are trying to change economics from within. So Dennis, what are the forces that are making it hard to change the paradigm of economics, and what thoughts do you have about how to accelerate a movement for fundamental changes in economics and economic policy making, which have become so very urgent?
I think the forces that keep us from changing are those that we always encounter when there is a need for great change. That is, we've built an entire system that is moving in one direction, but the world has changed and we need to move in a different direction. And everything in this system supports everything else, and therefore it's very difficult to break out. So economists and policymakers and business people, they all talk the same language, they've got the same concepts, they've got the same objectives, and therefore it's easy to build careers in any of these domains, and they all interlock very comfortably. Trying to change one part is very difficult, and therefore we need to do something that you also have in your book, which is we need to change the story whereby we live our lives. And I think the 5 points that I've elucidated are aspects of a story that we need to change in our heads. And I think changing the story at this point in time, when we have all these big problems at different levels from local to global, is a lot easier because the citizenry of the world, policymakers, have become totally dissatisfied with the standard economic toolbox of how to handle things. And they know that this toolbox is inadequate even to achieve the limited aims that economists aim for. And then the second thing is that climate change, social discord, pandemic, they have in part economic sources and economic consequences. And therefore, to leave them out of economic models makes absolutely no sense. And economists tend to say, well, the only thing that we're concerned with is how to allocate and distribute resources. And anything else having to do with society, climate, etc., that's in a different discipline. Ask them. That is just totally unacceptable, and people have understood this. And the third thing that people have understood is that the division of responsibility that economists and many policymakers have assumed we should follow no longer holds. And that division of responsibility is that the responsibility of consumers, citizens, is to maximize their own selfish utility, well-being. The business of business is business, and the business of government is to set the rules of the game so that everything turns out all right. That is a suicide mission for government, because it cannot be done if everybody is selfish. And it does not draw on our most important capacities, which are social capacities for cooperation, ethical understandings that across cultural, religious, and national lines that are absolutely necessary to move forward. And therefore, I think this could well be the Copernican moment, because everybody has understood that it is not sufficient for everyone to run around being selfish and the government needs to set it straight, but we all have responsibilities as well as rights. And these responsibilities have ethical foundations. And that, I guess, brings me to your work that crosses many lines from business to policy making. And I was wondering whether I could now turn around and ask you a question that is burning on my lips. Currently, as we see it, the current global system, as I've said, composed of economic, social, environmental, technological subsystems, is deeply unstable, and it produces outcomes that are very troubling, both socially and environmentally. And the root problem, as I've indicated, doesn't lie in individual domains, like the domain of knowledge, which distributed across specialized academic disciplines, or the domain of policy making distributed across different ministries within each government, or the domain of decision making, which can be divided into government decision making, business, civil society, academia. Rather, the root problem, as I said, is at the systemic level. The entire system needs to be transformed. And you have done more than most people in the world to think about this root problem. And you've written books about this, and you've introduced 3 ideas that are absolutely critical to tackling this root problem. One is systems thinking. The second is ethical reasoning that extends across cultural, national, religious lines. And the third is deep listening to strangers, to people who are not like us. And my question to you is, given all these insights, what does this imply about the changes that have to take place simultaneously on the supranational, national, and local levels in order for us to tackle the most important global problems that we face? And this is not a matter of indifference to me, because, as you've said, my team and I have been advising the G20 over the longer run. The G20 is probably the biggest show in town in terms of global governance issues. And the question is, how should G20 interact with national governments, interact with regional and local decision makers in pursuit of our overarching goals?
Well, Dennis, I was never trained as an economist academically. I learned physics when I was in the university, and I learned my economics as a manager and then as a policy maker. And I've been observing the need for economics to make a fundamental shift, as you have been explaining to us. And I want to continue to use the paradigm of physics, the science of physics, and the paradigm shifts it has gone through to explain why the three disciplines that you have mentioned that I insist are very important are required now. Now, physics underwent a paradigm shift 100 years ago when Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, and others revealed the limits of knowledge. Humans are creatures within a vast universe, and they are not objective observers outside a system that has created them. And these path breakers showed that our knowledge of reality will always depend on our personal perspectives, that knowledge is relative. Let's say it's always subjective. And they showed that it's impossible to measure anything too accurately because our attempts to measure anything will change it. Now, you can see how what you have been saying about the need for shifts in economics, these great physicists realized this 100 years ago. And they began to understand that you cannot understand how the world works merely by understanding the compositions of its particles. Like you said about individual human beings, if we understand how they think and rationalize, we can understand how the world works. It's not true. And they said we must also understand the forces that move the particles and connect their behaviors. It's like social interactions. And physicists are today struggling to find a theory that unifies all the forces, including gravity, and to fit forces into their worldview of particles. And physicists have realized that the world is not a machine. It is a living thing. It evolves. And evolutionary biology is the study of how systems learn to acquire new capabilities. In fact, life is a process of learning. And when learning stops, life ends. Now, I was trained as a physicist originally, but I have been studying the emerging sciences of evolutionary biology and organizational learning for the past 30 years and applying their insights in management and in public policy. And I believe that technologists, managers, and policymakers must learn the three disciplines that you mentioned to make the world better for everyone. The first is ethical reasoning. All religions and spiritual disciplines say that selfishness is bad and that we must care for others because society and nature nourish us. We empirically observe that human beings do care for others. The science of economics, on the other hand, as you said, has been founded so far on the premise that human beings are purely rational and self-interested. And the business corporation is designed as an institution whose legal duty it is to serve only itself, its own shareholders. Therefore, the modern capitalist business institution is by design selfish and unethical, and this must change. Now, the second discipline is systems thinking. Science has advanced with the European Enlightenment in silos. Knowledge has been broken up into many separate disciplines, and we have experts who know more and more about less and less. And none knows how the whole works. And therefore, we need a new enlightenment with the science of the whole, the systems thinking, and not mere sciences of the parts. Systems thinking, the evolutionary sciences, and an understanding of how systems learn have become essential to avoid the environmental and societal crises we are facing in this 21st century. Then the third discipline is a very simple one. It is deep listening to people who are not like us. If we do not listen to people who have other perspectives, how can we understand reality completely? And if we do not listen to people who appear to be not like us, how can we understand them and have any compassion for them? The world, to my mind, is suffering from a deluge of too much speaking and showing off on social media. It is suffering from a drought of deep listening to others, and we are being programmed by algorithms to listen to people we like, and we have no time or desire even now to listen to those who seem different. Good listening is a very simple action which can have profound effects on the health of societies. And just as good breathing, which is a very simple action, can have dramatic effects on the toning up of very complex systems like our bodies and our minds too, I think we must recover the gentle art of listening patiently and deeply to others. And just as we have declared a United Nations International Day of Yoga, we must have a United Nations International Day for listening to people not like ourselves. Deep listening by all citizens to each other will promote real harmony and enable all to work together to make the world better for everyone and save our planet, which, as you pointed out, is being overly exploited by competition between ourselves. And in that mode, we are destroying the very earth on which we must all depend for our sustenance and our future.
An idea can change the world. All we need is passion, focus, and a desire to help. If you have an idea that spans new thoughts on economics and beyond, please send it to us at whatever stage it is in. Our panel of experts will assess it and help propel it towards reality. The sky is your limit. Don't wait. Mail us your idea or innovative thought at beinspired@teamworkarts.com.